Haunted by Love, the supernatural lover who almost drove a woman insane. Hey everyone, welcome back to Will I Be Happy? I'm your narrator and really excited about today's video because it's not just any story, it's based on true events. There's something chilling about knowing that what you're about to hear actually happened, and I think you're going to find this one absolutely gripping. If you're into stories that dig deep into the unknown, the mysterious, or even the unexplained, then you're in for something special today. Don't forget to hit that like button if you're enjoying the video, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you make of this real-life mystery. Now let's dive into the Halloween story and see what really happened. All Hallows Eve had always been special to Mia Colton, but this year felt different. The night clung to her like a shroud, the chill in the air not just from the season, but from something more, something unseen, lurking at the edge of her senses. At 27, Mia had spent most of her adult life chasing the strange and unexplained, but nothing had prepared her for what she was about to experience. She had recently moved to Ravensbrook, a small, quiet New England town steeped in haunting folklore and local legends. After a messy breakup and leaving behind the chaos of Boston, she had sought peace here, hoping the eerie charm of the town's historic buildings and quaint streets would help her find herself again. But the town, with its narrow lanes lined by crooked jack-o'-lanterns and faded scarecrows, had offered her more mystery than peace. Ravensbrook was the kind of town where stories seemed to stick. Tales of witches, spirits, and ghostly apparitions passed from generation to generation. In the local pub, the air was thick with whispered legends and rumors, just the sort of place that drew Mia in. Her freelance journalism career had focused on writing about the mysterious and unexplained, but tonight, the stories weren't enough. The Hillstone Mansion, perched atop the hill at the town's edge, had always been the center of these whispered tales. But instead of writing about it, Mia found herself walking toward it. The mansion, once a grand estate belonging to the enigmatic Casper family, had been abandoned for decades. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones about the strange noises, ghostly sightings, and lights flickering through the windows at odd hours. Mia had written about the house before, piecing together local gossip for an article that sold well enough. But tonight, on All Hallows Eve, she wanted to see it for herself. Maybe the stories held more truth than she had ever let herself believe. As she stood at the base of the hill, her breath rising in thin, ghostly plumes, she felt an odd pull, like invisible hands were guiding her. The towering Gothic spires seemed to call to her, casting long shadows in the moonlight. She tightened her coat around herself and began to climb, her boots crunching over the frost-kissed leaves. The wind howled, wrapping around her like a cold embrace, and the house loomed above, watching her every step. The porch groaned under her weight, the boards warped and brittle with age. Mia hesitated, the front door looming like a mouth ready to swallow her whole. The stories about the Casper family and their tragic history buzzed in her mind. She had always dismissed them as folklore, yet here she was, on the doorstep of the very mansion she had warned others away from. With a deep breath, she pushed open the door. The sound of the creaking hinges echoed like a warning. Inside, the mansion was a time capsule of forgotten years. Dust-covered furniture stood untouched, cobwebs hung like lace from the ceiling, and the air was thick with the scent of age and abandonment. Mia's breath caught in her throat as she took in the grand, decaying staircase and the faded portraits lining the walls. The house wasn't just old, it felt alive, as though the very walls held the memories of those who had once lived here. She took a cautious step forward, the floor creaking beneath her feet. "Just a quick look," she whispered to herself. But as the words left her lips, a gust of icy wind swept through the room, snuffing out the candle she had brought. Her heart pounded in her chest, and then, from the shadows, a voice, smooth, calm, and eerily familiar, floated through the air. "You shouldn't be here." Mia froze. Her eyes darted toward the source of the voice, and there, emerging from the shadows, was a figure. He was tall, his lean frame wrapped in dark, old-fashioned clothing. His face, pale and sharp, was hauntingly beautiful, framed by raven black hair. But it was his eyes that caught her, piercing blue eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light, locking onto hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. Mia had always carried a quiet beauty about her. Her chestnut brown hair, falling just past her shoulders, framed a face that was more ethereal than striking. Her large, inquisitive green eyes had seen the world's shadows, yet they always managed to find light. In that moment, standing before the stranger in the mansion, she felt more like the subject of one of her ghost stories than the one writing it. I didn't mean to intrude," Mia stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just curious." The man smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're not intruding," he said, stepping closer, his presence magnetic. "Just visiting." Mia's pulse quickened. There was something undeniably alluring about him, something that tugged at her, though every instinct told her to run. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Alexander Casper," he replied softly, offering her a smile that sent a shiver down her spine. "And you are?" Mia Colton," she managed, still unsure whether she should feel terrified or enchanted. His gaze held her captive, as though he could see straight through her. "Well, Mia," Alexander said, his voice low and almost hypnotic, "you've come at an interesting time. The spirits are restless tonight." The temperature dropped noticeably as he spoke, and Mia's breath came out in a puff of white. She glanced around, the once grand mansion now suffocatingly intimate. It was just the two of them, surrounded by shadows, the world outside slipping further away. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from something deeper, something she didn't understand. As Mia's eyes adjusted to the dim light, she took in the full sight of him. Alexander was unlike anyone she had ever seen. His figure was tall and commanding, draped in clothing from a bygone era, a fitted charcoal vest over a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal strong forearms. His raven black hair was slightly tousled, curling around his ears and brushing the nape of his neck, giving him an effortless elegance. His skin was pale, almost too pale, like porcelain, but it made his features all the more striking. His eyes, a piercing blue, gleamed like ice in the moonlight, and there was a sadness there, an ageless sorrow that pulled Mia in deeper. His lips were full and inviting, curving into a soft smile that somehow felt both tender and dangerous. Every part of him seemed to exist in the space between worlds, too perfect, too beautiful to be of this earth. "You live here?" she asked cautiously, though the words felt absurd as they left her lips. "In a sense," Alexander said, his eyes shimmering in the faint light. His smile was soft, almost sad. "This place has been mine for a very long time." Before Mia could ask more, she felt a strange pull toward him. It was as though the space between them was shrinking without either of them moving. His presence was overwhelming, his scent, a mix of earth and something spiced, wrapped around her, intoxicating and almost too much to bear. "You're different," Mia whispered, her voice soft, like a ray of light. Alexander reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch was cool, sending a shiver through her body. "I can be whatever you want me to be, Mia," he said, his voice low and hypnotic. "I know you've been searching for something more, something beyond this world." Her heart pounded. How did he know that? How could he possibly know the hollow feeling she had carried with her, the sense that there was something more, something she had yet to find? "How do you know that?" "I know a lot about you," Alexander murmured, leaning in closer. His lips hovered just above hers, and for a brief moment, Mia felt as though she were floating, untethered from the ground. "I can feel it." The air between them crackled with energy, and Mia's mind raced. She had always believed in the unexplained, the supernatural, but this was different. Alexander felt real, too real. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't have to," Alexander replied softly, stepping even closer until their bodies were almost touching. Just feel. Without thinking, Mia reached out and touched his chest, expecting warmth but finding a coolness that startled her. Yet, despite the cold, she felt a surge of warmth flow through her body, a connection so intense it made her knees weak. "For quite some time, I wake up with your fragrance," Mia whispered almost to herself. "It's all over me. How is that possible?" Alexander smiled sadly, a wistful look in his eyes. "Because I'm always with you," he said quietly, "even when I'm not." Her heart raced as his words echoed in her mind. She had felt his presence before, fleeting, like a shadow in the corner of her eye, a whisper in the night. And now, standing in front of him, she realized that Alexander had been a part of her world for far longer than just this evening. Over the following nights, Mia learned more about Hillstone Mansion and its tragic past. Alexander had been the heir to the Casper family, a wealthy and powerful line of aristocrats who had built their fortune on shipping and trade in the late 1800s. The mansion had been a symbol of their prosperity, until one fateful winter, when a terrible illness swept through Ravensbrook. Alexander, along with his younger sister, had succumbed to the fever that ravaged the town, leaving the mansion empty and haunted by memories of what could have been. Mia found herself returning to the mansion more frequently, each encounter with Alexander leaving her with more questions than answers. In the dim glow of candlelight, as the autumn wind howled outside, Alexander began to share more about his family. "It wasn't always this way," he said one evening, his voice soft as they stood in what had once been a grand parlor. The room, now abandoned and covered in dust, still carried hints of its former elegance. Faded portraits lined the walls, and Mia found herself drawn to one in particular, a painting of a young man and a girl, no older than 15, both with striking blue eyes. "Is this you?" Mia asked, her fingers brushing the edge of the frame. Alexander nodded, stepping beside her. "That's me, and my sister Lily," he said, his voice tinged with sorrow. "The mansion was our home, a place of laughter and celebration. My father, William Casper, was a prominent figure in Ravensbrook, overseeing the family's vast shipping empire. The Caspers were known for their wealth, their influence, but what people didn't see was the pressure. Expectations placed on us to continue the family legacy." He paused, his eyes distant as if lost in the memories of a life long past. "I was the heir. Everything was supposed to fall on my shoulders when my father grew too old. Lily, though younger, was to marry into another powerful family, securing alliances for our business. We had a future laid out for us." Mia listened in silence, her heart aching for him. It was hard to imagine Alexander, the ghostly figure before her, as a young man with hopes and dreams for the future. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's gaze darkened, his expression clouded with grief. "It was the winter of 1893. A fever swept through Ravensbrook like a plague. It started in the docks, among the workers, and spread rapidly throughout the town. My father did everything he could to protect us, isolated the mansion, forbade anyone from coming or going. But it wasn't enough. The fever found its way inside." His voice wavered, and Mia saw the pain in his eyes. Lily was the first to fall ill. She was so young, so full of life. We tried everything, doctors, remedies, but nothing worked. I stayed by her side, held her hand as the fever consumed her, and soon after, it claimed me as well. Mia felt a lump in her throat, her chest tightening as Alexander continued. "Our father couldn't bear the loss. After we died, he closed up the mansion, locking away the memories, the pain. He left Ravensbrook not long after, taking what little remained of the family fortune. The house has stood empty ever since, haunted by the memories of what could have been." A heavy silence fell between them as Mia processed his words. The tragedy of it all, the loss, the unfulfilled future, it weighed on her like a stone. "You've been here ever since?" she asked gently. Alexander nodded, his expression unreadable. "I've been here, waiting, For years, I was trapped between the walls of this house, unable to move on, until you came." Mia's breath caught in her throat. "Why me?" His eyes softened, filled with a deep sadness and longing. "I don't know. Perhaps it was fate, or perhaps I've been waiting for someone like you, someone who could understand, someone who could see me, not as the ghost of a past life, but as something more." Mia's heart ached at his words, the connection between them growing stronger with each passing night. The weight of the mansion's history pressed upon her, but so did the reality of Alexander's presence. He wasn't just a ghost. He was a man whose life had been stolen by tragedy, whose soul had lingered in limbo, searching for something or someone to set him free. And in that moment, Mia realized that perhaps, just perhaps, she was the one he had been waiting for all along. The night after that, as the clock struck midnight, Mia found herself lying in the grand, decaying bedroom of the mansion. The velvet drapes were heavy with dust, but the bed, still intact after all these years, was surprisingly inviting. She sat on the edge, waiting, her heart racing as it always did when she knew Alexander was near. The soft sound of footsteps echoed through the hall, and then he appeared, just as he always did, like a shadow slipping through time. Alexander moved toward her, his eyes glowing in the faint light. This time, though, something was different. His movements were slower, more deliberate, and the air between them crackled with unspoken desire. Mia's breath caught as he reached out, his cool fingers brushing the bare skin of her arm. The sensation sent a shiver through her, but it wasn't the cold. It was the electricity that passed between them, a connection that was as tangible as it was inexplicable. "You feel it, don't you?" Alexander murmured, his voice low and rich, like velvet. He stepped closer, his body barely inches from hers, and Mia felt the heat rise within her despite the chill in the room. "I do," she whispered, her voice trembling with anticipation. Without another word, Alexander leaned in, his lips hovering just above hers. His breath was cool, like the night air, but the desire in his eyes burned like fire. Slowly, he closed the distance, and when his lips met hers, it was like a spark igniting something deep inside her. His kiss was soft at first, teasing, but it quickly deepened, his hands sliding up her arms to cradle her face. Mia's pulse quickened, her body responding to him in ways she hadn't expected. She could feel his strength in the way he held her, the cool firmness of his hands as they moved down her back, pulling her closer. She sank into him, her hands tangling in his hair, her body pressed against his. Despite the coolness of his touch, there was an undeniable heat that radiated from him, wrapping around her like a cloak. Alexander broke the kiss, his lips trailing down her neck, sending waves of pleasure through her with every touch. Mia gasped, her fingers digging into his shoulders as his mouth found the sensitive spot just below her ear. His name slipped from her lips, a breathless whisper that only made him pull her closer. "You're mine," he murmured against her skin, his voice thick with longing. "And I am yours, Mia, in every way." The world outside the mansion faded, leaving only the two of them, lost in the moment, lost in each other. His hands explored her body with a knowing touch, as if he had been waiting for this for centuries. She had never felt anything like it, this overwhelming desire, this need that consumed her completely. It was as if their souls had entwined, their bodies mere vessels for the passion that surged between them. For what felt like an eternity, they were bound by out-of-this-world love, desire, and something far more powerful than either of them could explain. And when the moment finally passed, leaving them breathless and tangled together, Mia knew that no matter where he went or what he became, she would never forget the way it felt to be in his arms, to be his. The nights that followed felt like a dream, one Mia never wanted to wake from. Every night at the stroke of midnight, Alexander appeared. They spent hours together, wrapped in each other's arms, talking, laughing, and sometimes just lying in silence. His touch was soft yet electric, sending sparks through her skin. His scent, earthy and warm, lingered on her even after he vanished just before dawn. But as the nights wore on, something began to gnaw at Mia. How long could this last? She had fallen deeply in love with Alexander, but there was something unsettling about the way he disappeared before sunrise. Every morning, she awoke alone in the cold, her heart aching with a longing that never fully subsided. When Halloween arrived, as she stood in front of the mirror, preparing to visit the mansion once again, a sudden thought crossed her mind. She paused, staring at her reflection, her chest tightening as the thought took hold. What if he's not real? The thought came out of nowhere, unbidden, but once it appeared, it wouldn't leave her alone. Was Alexander just a figment of her imagination, a ghost of her lonely heart? She had to talk to someone who could pull her back to reality. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her phone and scrolled to Kaya Pampers, one of her oldest and dearest friends. Kaya had always been there for her through the best and worst of times. If anyone could help her make sense of this, it was her. The phone buzzed, and soon Kaya's familiar voice crackled through the speaker. "Mia, girl, you will not believe the ridiculous costume I'm wearing right now to the party. Sexy Snow White. I mean, seriously, why does everything have to be sexy?" Mia chuckled, though her mind was far from Kaya's costume dilemma. Sexy Snow White? Really? Yeah, I look like a walking Apple ad, but hey, it's a party. Anyway, what's going on? Why are you calling so late? Mia hesitated, her throat dry. Kaya, I need to talk to you about something. Something weird. The playfulness drained from Kaya's voice. Weird how? I've been seeing someone, Mia said slowly, but I don't know if he's real. There was a long pause. What do you mean, not real? Are you saying this guy is a ghost? I don't know, Mia whispered, pacing the room. I've been spending time at Hillstone Mansion. I met someone there, Alexander. He's beautiful, Kaya, but he only appears at night, and by dawn he's gone. I don't know what's happening, but I think I'm in love with him. Mia, Kaya's voice dropped, full of concern. That place? The haunted mansion? People have seen things there, but it's just stories. You know that, right? This guy can't be real. Mia closed her eyes, her heart heavy. But he feels real. I can feel him, smell him. He's always with me, even when he's not there. Just as Mia spoke, the room grew colder, the temperature dropping sharply. The candle on her desk flickered, then dimmed. She glanced toward the window where a shadow passed by, tall and lean, just like Alexander. Goosebumps rose on her arms. Kaya's voice broke through her thoughts. Mia, you still there? Yeah, Mia stammered, shaking her head as if to clear it. Sorry, I don't know what's real anymore. I'm worried about you, Kaya said softly. Come stay with me in Vegas for a few days. Clear your head, meet cute boys. This sounds like something you need distance from. I'll think about it, Mia whispered, glancing toward the window again, but the shadow was gone. Still, she could feel it, his presence, lingering. When Mia arrived at the mansion that night, the air was colder than usual, and the shadows seemed to stretch farther. As she stepped inside, the floorboards groaned beneath her weight, and the wind howled through the cracks in the windows. But when she saw Alexander standing at the base of the staircase, smiling at her, the tension in her chest eased. Mia, he said softly, holding out his hand. You came. She stepped toward him, but something was different tonight. The air felt heavier, charged with an energy she couldn't explain. She hesitated, her gaze searching his face. Alexander, what are you? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You already know the answer to that. Her heart pounded as the reality of his words sank in. You're not alive, are you? For the first time, Alexander's gaze faltered. He looked away, his jaw tightening. No. Mia's world seemed to tilt. Everything she had ignored, all the signs, now screamed at her. Alexander was a ghost, a spirit from another time, and yet, despite it all, despite the chilling truth, her love for him hadn't wavered. I don't care, she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't care if you're a ghost. I love you." Alexander's face softened, his own eyes misting. "And I love you, Mia. But love can't always transcend death." The room seemed to close in on them as the mansion groaned and creaked. The wind outside rattled the windows, and the shadows in the corners of the room began to shift, crawling along the walls like dark, twisted figures. The air grew thick, and the faintest whispers began to fill the space, voices, soft and sinister, growing louder with each passing second. Mia pulled back, her eyes wide as the shadows began to take shape, reaching out toward her. "What's happening?" "The others," Alexander said softly, his voice hollow. "They've been waiting. They're not like me. They've been lost for too long, trapped in the darkness, and now they're trying to get through." The shadows crawled closer, their inky forms twisting and writhing, their whispers sharp and hungry. One of them reached out, its long, shadowy fingers brushing against Mia's cheek. She gasped, stumbling back, an icy chill racing through her body. "They want what we have," Alexander said, his voice strained. "But you can't stay. If you stay, they'll take you." Mia's heart raced as the shadows closed in, their whispers hissing her name, promising love, eternity, and peace. But underneath the promises was a hunger, a desperation that sent chills down her spine. "I won't leave you," she cried, her voice breaking. "You have to," Alexander said, his hands cold but steady as he held her close. "If you stay, they'll take you too." Tears filled Mia's eyes as she gazed up at him, the reality of their fate crashing down around her. "I can't lose you. You won't," Alexander whispered, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I'll always be with you. In another life, we'll find each other again." The wind howled louder, and the shadows surged forward, their voices rising into a frenzy. One of them lunged at Mia, its cold fingers wrapping around her wrist. She cried out, stumbling back into Alexander's chest. He spun her behind him, shielding her from the darkness as the shadow shrieked and recoiled from his touch. "There's no time," Alexander said, his voice barely audible over the storm that raged inside the mansion. "Mia, you have to go." With a final, heart-wrenching look, Mia turned and ran. The shadows hissed and snarled behind her, their whispers chasing her through the crumbling halls. She stumbled over the decaying floorboards, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the darkness clawed at her heels. As she burst through the mansion's front door, the cold night air hit her like a wave, and the whispers fell silent. The storm that had raged inside the house was gone, replaced by the quiet rustle of the autumn wind. She turned back, her chest heaving, her heart shattered. The mansion stood still and silent under the moonlight, but in her heart she knew Alexander was gone. Mia stood in the darkness, her body trembling as she stared up at the mansion. The veil had closed, and the connection between their worlds had been severed. But she knew that no matter where Alexander went, his love would stay with her, haunting her, comforting her, a ghost of a memory she would never forget. And maybe, just maybe, in another lifetime, they would meet again. For now, though, the night stretched on, dark and endless. Can you believe that actually happened? It's incredible when truth is stranger than fiction, and this true story really had some twists that were hard to believe. I'm so glad you stayed with me until the end, and I'd love to know what you thought. Did this story surprise you? Leave a comment below and let's get a conversation going. I'm always curious to see how these real events land with everyone. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. It helps the channel grow and reach more people who love diving into these kinds of stories. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to Will I Be Happy so you're always the first to hear about new stories based on real life. Thanks for watching, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay happy.